Welcome to You Decide. I'm your host, Errol Louis. Before we get started, I've got an announcement about our live event that's coming up on Monday, September 29th. We want to see you there. We're going to be doing this here in Chelsea. I've got some details. I will be hosting, along with my colleagues who do the other podcast, Off Topic on Politics. My colleagues, Courtney Gross and Bobby Kuza, and I are going to be doing this at Racket NYC. That's at 431 West 16th Street here in Chelsea. The doors are going to open at 5:30. We're going to talk for a while. I'm seeing about this cash bar. It's going to be a great time. We're going to have some guests. We're going to talk politics. Love to see all of you. It's going to be free, but you have to RSVP, and we'll be giving you some information about that. But you should head to NY1.com or the Spectrum News app. That's where the information and the RSVP link will be there. And we hope to see you there on September 29th. So now, on to today's segment. This week, I am pleased to be talking with Catherine Wylde. She is the president and CEO of the nonprofit Partnership for New York City. We'll explain exactly what that is. It's often referred to as a business organization, but that doesn't quite do it justice. She's here to talk about the race for mayor, the state of the New York City economy, the future of what is going to happen around here, the fiscal priorities for the next mayor, and much more. Thanks so much for coming in. Great to see you.
Thank you for having me, Errol.
So let's explain the partnership now. Like I said, to call it a business organization is just shorthand, but it's a very particular kind of organization that I think of as it happens to be some of the biggest, best-known corporations in the city. How would you describe it?
Well, it's an organization that was established by David Rockefeller at the end of the 70s when he thought the city's business community had a great deal of responsibility for the city's economy and fiscal collapse during the 1970s. And he thought business had been asleep at the switch, that should never happen again. So he created an organization that was not a chamber of commerce. It was business working in the interests of the city. And he insisted it be the direct participation of the top chief executives in the city, paying attention to the city's issues, making the resources of their organization available, working with the mayor, the governor, the congressional delegation to deal with those challenges that government could not handle on its own. So that's the genesis, and it's really as much a civic as a business organization, but it represents the perspective of business, the voice of business on the big issues facing the city. We're a business group that has supported things like creating a payroll mobility tax on corporations to support the subway system, as an example, creating congestion pricing, supporting Mayor Bloomberg when he said, I want a real estate tax increase after 9/11 when we had to rebuild and expand the city's economy. So we have been an organization that has sponsored public education. We were in the 80s the largest producer of affordable housing through a nonprofit program, public-private program. So we've got a long history of doing things that have helped build New York City back from many disasters, including the pandemic. And going forward, we see our role similarly, that we're going to continue to be business, making resources, the talent of the private sector available to solve big problems facing the city.
Has it fulfilled the original vision of David Rockefeller, would you say?
Absolutely. David Rockefeller stuck with us. He was the chairman until 1987, from 1979 to 1987. And then he stayed as an honorary member, stayed involved. I had the privilege of working for him. His first job out of grad school, he was an economist, but his first job out of grad school was as the secretary to Mayor Errol Louis. And he learned the city from the inside out under Mayor LaGuardia and forever remained a champion of all things New York.
Very, very interesting. The size of the organization now, and it's helpful to know that it's CEOs as opposed to the businesses, meaning there is a distinction between, say, Steve Swartz, who's the CEO of Hearst. Hearst is not the member; the CEO is. Is that a fair way to put it?
The CEO is the member. Their direct involvement is really important, obviously, because they can make quick decisions. And they can really determine the culture of the organization, and so it's their involvement is yes. So right now the co-chairs are Albert Bourla, who's the CEO of Pfizer, which, among other things, delivered the first COVID vaccine in 11 months after the pandemic started, and then therapeutic support for recovery from COVID. And Rob Spire, who is the CEO of Tishman Speyer, one of our large real estate companies. They're right now actually developing the J.P. Morgan Chase edifice on Park Avenue and 47th Street. Right,
which is due to open. We just did a special on New York One about that. So these are heavy hitters. It's interesting. It almost seems as if it was an institutionalization of what had to be done and what was done successfully during the fiscal crisis, meaning there were a lot of important decisions that were made by, the chair of Citibank and a bunch of other institutions, Con Edison, the big utilities.
And in fact, those are the same people that worked with David was very involved in that. And it was the same people that worked on the fiscal crisis, which included Felix Rohatyn, was the chairman he was at Lazard at the time, Walter Wriston at Citi, as you mentioned, Dick Shin, who was MetLife, John Weinstein at Goldman Sachs. It was all those same guys. And I do say guys advisedly.
Yes, indeed.
It was all those same guys who turned around. In fact, the woman they wanted, David didn't want to have an organization without women on the board. So he figured out how to bring in Donna Shalala, who was then the president of Hunter College, but she was a member of the board of the New York Stock Exchange, first woman member. So he figured out how to find the women that were out there and bring them in, which thank goodness for that.
Very interesting. I read your piece in Cranes about how women have, in your career and in your observations, really kind of risen, and it was kind of a long path, both for you and for a lot of other women. I imagine you have some women members now in the partnership.
Yes, we do indeed. We've got, obviously Jane Fraser, who's the first woman to CEO a major international bank, who is terrific at Citibank. And we have a number of others. Christiana Riley, who is heading the U.S. division of U.S. Bank and Santander Bank. We have Karen Seidman-Becker, who is the CEO and founder of Clear, which anybody who wants to get through the airport in reasonable time.
Please thank her for me. Yes, I'm a devoted member. Yes,
and is a New Yorker. And so we've got a great selection of top women heading law firms. Faisa Saeed, the first woman to head Cravath. Julie Jones, the first woman to head Ropes and Gray. So we've got a good representation.
Okay, very good, very good. And so
I have made that my business.
Yes, indeed. The numbers I've seen suggest that collectively the impact of the members is about 1 million employees here in New York.
Correct.
And about $250 billion per year in economic activity.
Yes, absolutely. And that's just direct, not counting indirect, because more than half the jobs, or about half the jobs in New York City, are at companies with more than 500 people. I mean, we love to celebrate small business. We love small business. But the engine of the New York economy is really the fact that we're the headquarters city for so many industries, starting with finance, but then the professional services. We've got the 4 global accounting firms are all headquartered here. The law firms, the great global law firms, are headquartered here. The technology, we're now number 2 to Silicon Valley, which everybody thought, well, this would never happen. But in a very short period of time, and thank you, Michael Bloomberg, because he made it his business to build the technology sector in the city. But and then obviously design, construction, healthcare. We have the great. I mean, we are a headquarters city. We are a global leader, and this has happened really relatively quickly, where we've aggregated the talent, et cetera. Obviously, big threat to us right now are immigration policies.
Sure.
You know, I just read that for the first year, I think since the country started, we are going to have more Americans emigrating out of this country than people coming into it. That's a huge shock to the system because New York City has always grown by foreign immigration, not by domestic immigration.
Sure.
Now, on the positive side, we're still the #1 destination for college students, applications to college, NYU being at the top of the list nationally. We are the #1 destination for college graduates looking for a great first job and obviously the fun that goes with being in New York City. So we've got a lot of positives, but we have to be very careful. National immigration policy is so important to this city, and obviously, the threat of mass deportations of people who have been here for years and may not have all the legal documentation but are contributing to our society, that threatens political stability. But our whole economy is threatened by this.
Well, yeah, let's talk about that a little bit because, what's referred to as talent, meaning the young people and the mid-career, the folks who are going to be the next generation of leadership in these major corporations, they want to be here. There's a sometimes overblown discussion about, well, if we tax them too much or we don't do the right thing, they're going to pick up and move to Dallas or they're going to pick up and relocate to London and so forth. I know some of that is rhetoric, some of that is overblown, but what's the reality of it? I mean, these corporations do rely on talent, and the fact that the young people do want to be here is what keeps a lot of these headquarters here, right?
Absolutely. I think the reality there is complicated. You cannot underestimate the impact of in 2018, the country lost the ability to deduct your state and local taxes from your federal tax bill. That was a huge tax increase for New Yorkers. New York has the highest tax burden in the country. And as Mike Bloomberg used to say, the value proposition is such, you got to pay for it if you want to be here. And people were willing to do that. But it was a real difficult situation. And what we've seen for inveterate New Yorkers, they're staying, they're paying the taxes, they're not going anywhere. But in terms of attracting new people, there was a study that came out last week from Citizens Budget Commission, which I know you featured on the news, that basically said, comparatively, New York is not gaining millionaires at the rate we have historically or at the rate of other states. We are losing market share of millionaires. Yes, we have a few more, but we're losing market share. We're not keeping up competitively with the rest of the country and with the low tax states. So bringing people in, which is how we grow, is a challenge.
Right.
And our tax base, 1% of the taxpayers pay 40% of the taxes in terms of individual income taxes. So we can't afford to lose very many of those.
And by the way, that's not necessarily ideal. I mean, I know politically it would almost never happen, but ideally I would think it would be better to have the tax base shared by a much broader percentage of the city, that more people had skin in the game.
Stability, sustainability would be much stronger if that were shared more broadly, and we'd be far less dependent on the very rich if we had a much broader base of the taxes. But at the same time, when the cost of living in the city has risen so dramatically, raising taxes on the middle class is really not an option.
Right.
So what are you going to do?
Right. What's your sense of why it's so expensive to live here these days?
The tax burden is one piece because we have the highest taxes on utilities. We have the highest taxes on telecom, your electric bill. You look at this stuff and you'll see that all gets passed along to consumers. And so you can't ignore the extent to which taxes and fees are, and the cost. Like there was an article just, I think this morning on the cost per capita, what we're spending, government spending on education per capita is over $42,000 per student per year.
Right.
And that is multiples of states with much better education outcomes.
That's for K through 12. That's just for the public schools.
That's just the public schools, K through 12. And if you look at anything, we just issued a report this week on the cost of insurance in New York, which is multiples of any place else. The cost of insurance in New York is driven by the fact that the trial lawyers who bring lawsuits and court cases and do big settlements, they have managed to create the most expensive litigation system in the country. Car insurance in New York is 49% higher than the average in the country. Health insurance is 12% higher. Property and casualty similarly. All that is passed along in the cost of living. And this has happened in the last dozen years. If you look at today, we are the third most expensive city cost of living in the world. 15 years ago, we were in double digits in the 20s.
Sure.
This has happened quickly. So this is something, and we can identify now the laws, and when they build into a law, we're going to have a private right of action as the way of enforcement. That means the way you enforce this law is not because government catches you, it's that you go to court and you settle or sue.
Right.
And that's what's happening, and our settlements and our awards, jury awards, are multiples of any place else in the country. So here we are.
Very interesting. And you say we're the third most expensive city in the world, I guess behind like Geneva and London or something?
Number one is Singapore. Number two is Zurich. And we're tied with Geneva as third.
That's amazing.
And those are not the kind of diverse city that New York is.
They're a lot cleaner, I'll tell you that. They know where their tax dollars are going.
Well, they're a lot more elitist.
Yes. Well, yes, that's one way to put it. Yes. So actually, let me drill down on something that I know has been one of your initiatives that you talked about that probably deserves a little more attention. One of these embedded costs that ends up making life more expensive for everybody is property taxes. And I know that you at one point suggested, look, if a third of the cost of the typical apartment building is property tax, that's a pretty important lever if you wanted to either do rebates or adjust the rates, depending on the neighborhood or depending on the kind of housing that they have, in order to bring down the cost of housing. It's not that complicated. I mean, I read it, and I understood it immediately. I imagine the legislature could too, and even the city council.
The problem has been, and I had this argument with the de Blasio administration when they were in office, when the legislature and Governor Cuomo were eliminating the ability to pass along to tenants the cost of improvements in buildings. And when they had that legislation, I said, unless you provide a property tax relief, there's just no other source. The rents are already too high. It's not because the developers are making large profits. I mean, believe me, developer profits and investor profits are nothing close to 30% of the operating costs. They're a tiny fraction of that. So 30% of the operating costs in the 1 million plus rent-regulated apartments are real estate taxes. And that's because they're cross-subsidizing single-family homes and condominiums. And Mike Bloomberg, again, I don't mean to keep referencing him, but I paid a lot of attention to his administration. Mike Bloomberg used to say, my home on 79th Street has far lower taxes than a rental apartment down the block. And that's because of our crazy tax system. But in order to reduce taxes over here and still keep city revenues, because most of the city revenues come from real estate taxes, in order to change that and get a formula that's more fair and allows you to, as Zoran Mandani wants to do, freeze the rents. You could freeze the rents if you reduce property taxes.
Sure.
No problem. But somebody has to pay unless we figure out how to reduce other costs. So when they get into the negotiation, and we've had several tax reform commissions, and Martha Stark, who I know you have had on, is the real expert on this, but she has taught us all that There are ways, but you would have to have other people pay more. Now, I live in a co-op in Bay Ridge. My apartment is probably valued at close to $1 million. My property taxes pro rata for my apartment are $2,700 a year.
Yeah, right. It's like basically free. Yeah.
Which is nothing.
Right. That's right.
We've got to look at this and fix it, but we are not doing that.
Well, I mean, yeah. And I would think at this point you can almost have an AI engine go and look at it, look at all of the spreadsheets, because you don't have to make it. I understand the last 3 mayors have pretended to look at this and decided in the last week of the administration, sorry, we can't do anything.
Can't be bothered,
But it, because it's a Gordian knot, right? The utilities are in there too with their own little special rates. But it seems to me that on an almost spot basis, you could create a program and say, if you have rent-regulated apartments and you're in this zip code, or you have a certain percentage of social good that we think your building could provide or is providing, we'll give you a targeted, one-time, limited to this building tax rebate on some of it. It seems to me you could figure that out.
We had a very successful in the 70s when we were, that was sort of the end of the useful economic life of many properties. We passed J51 then, which provided for both moderate and gut rehab of buildings. If you were converting a building, like a commercial building being converted to residential, or if you were substantially upgrading, there was a tax abatement program, exemption from increases on improvements, that was very successful. But to do that, the government has to give up some revenues. And when we passed the rent law changes in, I guess it was 2019, I went into the administration, the city administration, and Albany, in this case, has the power, but they will not pass these rent exemptions unless the mayor tells them it's okay, because it's his revenues. Right. So they're not going to screw around. So I went in and they said, OMB said, it will cost $150 million a year if we give a J51 that balances out the loss of the major capital improvement increases. And I said, that's peanuts. You have a $100 billion plus budget. Sure. Peanuts. Oh, no, we can't give that up.
It's like a bargain.
Yeah.
Sounds like a bargain.
No, it is. We've got to begin to think bigger picture about the affordability crisis. And we've got to recognize that we can't protect all vested interests.
Right. Well, we're creating new vested interests. What do you make of the expansion and the growth and the popularity of childcare paid for by the government? It seems to me like, talking to some of my younger colleagues around here, it is a big, big deal. And it makes the difference for some of them between thinking about leaving the city and not.
Well, I've been talking with Reshma Saujani, who you may know, who is somebody who's a champion, has, she has paid a lot of attention to mothers since she became a mother, and is a real champion of doing something about childcare and looking at it not just from the standpoint, it's very hard for cities with a local tax base as opposed to the federal government. It's very hard to create a new entitlement that everybody is eligible for. It's extraordinarily expensive. And so you have to think about, how do we do this in a way that everybody who needs support gets it, and that it's not only affordable but accessible in their neighborhood? And how do you keep the costs at a level that the local tax base can support? And one of the things that we haven't really explored, we did a study with the United Settlement Houses, which is all the settlement groups, Henry Street, et cetera. We did a study with them about 20 years ago about, could we set up a system where we really trained, where we used family care at home. They say there's the home care for children, where you have 5 or 6 kids who are in childcare, in a setting where the entrepreneur, the person who has the apartment or the home, they are trained, they're carefully screened, the marketing, insurance, administration is done for them. Much less expensive than building new daycare facilities and
family daycare.
Family daycare. And also provides jobs for people and And the settlement houses would be an ideal vehicle in communities across the city to manage that process. We did the proposal and we came out with a study, but it never happened. And the reason it never happened, I think, basically, is childcare facilities are basically unionized. And this would be a transfer of resources and contracts, et cetera. It would be the nonprofitization movement. And increasingly, honestly, the public sector unions are very much against that.
Sure. Well, no, I remember when they did the big expansion under de Blasio, and there were some that were with nonprofits, and then there were some that were attached to the schools. Basically, a new grade was added, and those were UFT union members. And the disparities in pay and conditions and everything else were quite significant.
And cost.
We're quite significant.
So
and of
we
course,
have to figure out a way, again, we have to make hard decisions, we being ultimately the government. We have to make hard decisions about how do we achieve these goals, provide affordable childcare, which must be a top priority if we're going to keep working people and a middle class in this city. How do we do that and do it within the means of the local tax base?
What's it like when you go to City Hall and in some of these hearings, the answer to every question is, hey, Kathy Wylde, why don't you and the wealthy people that you represent just pay a little bit more in taxes?
Well, sometimes it's the right solution. And as I mentioned in opening, we have
payroll mobility tax,
when it's the right
pricing,
solution,
right.
And when business is at the table to think through, and this may be true for childcare, because employees' reliability, ability to get to work, ability to afford to live here, very much childcare is a major component of that concern. So that is a case that Reshma and we're exploring with her. It's on the priority list for the Democratic nominee for mayor, Zoran Mandani. So that's something that we're going to look at. The important thing, I think, there is that the taxpayer representatives, which include our organization, are at the table.
Right.
And that there is an honest conversation about, are we going to try and feather everybody's nest, or are we going to really address the need in the most economic and efficient way possible and keep some control over the spending? And that's the conversation those are the conversations we had to have in the 70s and 80s because the city had no money.
Sure.
And so that discipline was here. And that's when we had all the nonprofitization where many nonprofit organizations took over public services at a relatively low cost. And we created the Central Park Conservancy and the Prospect Park Alliance. And there were lots of ways in which private sector resources stepped up and partnered with government to find more economic solutions. We haven't done that for the last 20 years because government has been flush. Well, with the federal cuts that are coming down the pike and the economic challenges we're facing, and the increased costs, we're not going to have that luxury. So I think we're going to be back to the future in terms of...
Do we have the infrastructure? I've noticed, and we've done a lot of reporting on how many agencies, including some critical agencies like HPD, Housing Preservation and Development, are just severely understaffed to the point where basic programs have slowed like molasses because there just aren't enough people there to process the paperwork.
Great example. Everybody says, well, nothing's happening in housing because HPD is understaffed. This is nonsense. In fact, when HPD had a much smaller staff, we got much more done. And the reason we got much more done is because we had nonprofit intermediary organizations. The Housing Partnership, which I ran, was one in the 80s and 90s. The Community Preservation Corporation was the original one, and that's a nonprofit. They ran Enterprise Foundation, the LISC organization, the Supportive Housing Corporation. These are all nonprofits. We ran the government programs. We ran the ownership program. The Nehemiah Group ran the Nehemiah Ownership Program. Liskin Enterprise ran the rehab programs. Community Preservation Corporation ran the vacant building programs with private owners. HPD came in at the end and audited.
What changed?
Huh?
What
changed?
Yes.
Government grew is what changed. And the process, HPD, we have this crazy lottery system. HPD markets the homes, and the homes that are renovated, low-income housing that's renovated or built new in this, sits empty for a year or more because the government process for marketing the homes is so cumbersome, slow, and complicated. We used to hire community groups, Bed-Stuy Restoration or the Mid-Bronx Desperados, to market the homes. It got done. The homes were marketed tenant or ownership before they were sold.
Sure, of course.
Before they were built.
Of course,
before they were built.
which is what you're supposed to do. Right.
That doesn't exist anymore.
Wow.
We just can't get out of our own way. And so we have grown government. So, in the last 12 years, the city budget has doubled. Or grown by 50%. I'm not good at math. Grown by 50%. So it hasn't doubled, but it will.
Right.
If we don't stop. Growing government is not the solution to this problem. That's contributing to the affordability crisis again.
Interesting. So what does the next mayor need to do? What would be on your top 5 list, top 3 list after they get sworn in on January 1st? Well,
obviously, the cost of living and doing business in the city, I think, has surpassed crime since the Adams administration, Jesse Tisch, Governor Hochul. I think they've got a real handle. The district attorneys, they've all been working together for the last couple of years. I think we've got a real handle on the crime situation. The latest numbers to come out, August was the best month for general crime that we've had in memory. Overall crime this year is down 6.7% already, but the subway crime is down 22%. Burglaries are down 18%. They've got a handle on crime. That was the number one issue coming out of the pandemic. Now it is the cost. It's the rent. It's the general cost of living in the city, the rents, the groceries, whatever. Some of that, as we know, is a problem coming out of Washington. But a big part of it are the issues we're talking about locally, that we have created a very expensive government, and that's all passed along, whether it's through taxes or whether it's through the rising cost of goods, services, housing, et cetera.
It's a permanent dilemma, I imagine. But, look, Mamdani won his primary in large part on this promise of, I'm going to freeze the rents, which at best is a temporary solution. It was done 3 times during the de Blasio administration, did not stop the prices from galloping upward. But I get it. It works politically. It helped win him the primary. It's not an unreasonable thing to offer to 2 million New Yorkers if you're trying to get elected mayor. But necessary, arguably necessary, definitely not sufficient. What does he need to do, assuming he does his rent freeze and it takes effect for a year or two? But what else would he need to do if he's the mayor?
He has nuanced that freeze the rents by saying he will reform property taxes. So I think that he's getting it. This is post-primary conversation, but I think he is understanding that life is more complicated than just doing one-liners, that you got to figure out, okay, what are the factors contributing to high rents and how do we deal with them? And I think that's what we have to do. And there are experts in the private and nonprofit sector, and hopefully some of them will be going into his administration in government if he's elected. There are answers. There are things we can do. Right. There are also interesting ways to raise money. Raise revenues for the city aside from raising taxes. An example. 8 or 9 years ago, the city passed a law that said all city public data must be free.
Yes.
Well, what does that mean? That means you have a number of big tech companies that go into the city stuff, take all their data, and sell it.
That is correct.
For the highest and best price.
Yes.
And there's an opportunity. The city will have to make an investment in organizing their data in a smart way, setting up a system. The city ought to be selling that data and creating new revenue streams. Just one example that is perfectly possible to do and would also provide the city with much better understanding of what's going on, because to do this, they would have to understand the data they've got and have good analysis.
Sure.
And we have members of the partnership who are more than prepared to go in and help them do that. So that's an example of one of the many things I think we can do, many ways that technology and AI can be applied. I was speaking last week with our first woman police commissioner, Keishan Sewell, who has landed nicely with the Mets. But Keishan, I said to her, can Mamdani's plan for separating mental health cases from the police department, taking that out of the portfolio of the police, letting them do crime and letting social workers and medical professionals, I said, can that work? She said, it has worked in other cities and failed in others. And she said, where it's worked, you've had excellent triage. So it can't just be somebody mechanically at 911 or 311 making the decision. Do you know, I was just thinking about how I've heard the applications. AI could do that.
Of course they could.
So
they could even predictively tell you, like we've got the fourth call to this address. This guy is part of Health and Hospitals. We know he's on, certain antipsychotic meds, and you might want to send somebody by there, send a social worker.
So that's the kind of thing, if you said to the business community, we want to do a surtax for a couple of years to raise the money to invest in figuring out how to upgrade these services, how to use AI to make a really smart city.
Yeah, sure.
You would get support for that.
Sure. I mean, look, Google, which owns the building that we're sitting in, they're very good at that. I see these kids running around with their little Chromebooks. Yeah. And my feeling is they can probably figure out anything. If you just give them like a box of pizza and a weekend, they'll give you at least the outlines of a solution to almost any problem. That sounds very interesting and hopeful. Let me ask you about something you've talked with me about a lot, which is there's a large sort of structural mismatch that you've noticed over the years between the number of jobs that are available and the sort of training and skills of a population that is always looking for jobs. How do we fix that?
Well, there is honestly a big effort going into that. And I think we've had a real breakthrough in the last couple of years, and particularly in the last year or two. I think Melissa Vilas-Ramos is doing a very good job at focusing on, the school's chancellor is doing a very good job of focusing on really working with employers to figure out from K through 12 and CUNY through CUNY, what are the skills that are going to be needed and what will propel success. And for the first time, and I give Judy Diamond, head of the Diamond Foundation, Jamie Diamond's wife, who runs JP Morgan Chase, give her a lot of credit because she's made a major philanthropic investment in something called Future Ready New York. Every kid should have, this isn't vocational education. Every kid should have the basic financial literacy skills, the basic reading and math skills, and then exposure to what the jobs in the economy of New York are like. And we just never have had that. You had a college track and you had a vocational track, and we've just never recognized that in the knowledge economy, everybody needs this opportunity to understand how they can put their education to work for their life. And there's a huge push going on. I think there's been a lot of progress. And the other thing that people don't realize, the kids who do best on the exams, who have the lowest absentee rate and who show up in school are basically the kids going through career and technical education programs.
Oh, interesting.
Which is the vocational stuff.
Huh. Interesting. Well, okay. They have a little extra incentive.
They understand. They get it.
So, look, before I let you go, I mean, there's a general sense. I have a general sense in the city that there's an underlying anger, that there's a sort of a divisiveness, that there are people who feel like their fellow New Yorkers are almost on another planet, that we're not pulling together. And a lot of that is anger that gets expressed at some of your members, frankly, at the people who are millionaires, who are billionaires, who are hooked into the global economy in a really privileged way and can, vacation and can travel and don't necessarily have to deal with, the price of chicken and rice on a halal cart, and that, or, getting licensed or, running into problems with the city and the public schools and everything else. How do we bring people together? In theory, it's the job of a politician to do that, but I have a very strong sense that we're asking a little too much of them. We've all got to sort of make a contribution here.
I agree. And I feel that financial insecurity is the single biggest driver of this resentment and hostility because, from what I understand, for the first time in American history, parents today don't feel their kids will have a better life. And that's been true for the last 30, 40 years, but it becomes more true every year. Through the media, they're exposed to the extreme wealth of some people. And then everybody else, including them, we hardly have a middle class anymore. Access to home ownership, which was the ticket to the middle class for generations of Americans. It was the nest egg that allowed them to put their kids through college or start a business or whatever. That's disappeared for the vast majority of people, and particularly in a place like New York, where housing is so expensive. But this is a national phenomenon. This isn't local. So, just too many people, the division is too great. And I really think that for people in the very wealthy class, it's easy to not recognize that because the globalization of the economy in the last 30 years has meant the attention of business leaders and the top 1% is on the global economy and on Washington, not on City Hall, not local. And so they really aren't getting how bad this division is and what the source of the resentment is, because they're operating in a different world, if you will. So you have to be, to me, that's the problem we have to solve. Obviously, that's a national problem. I don't think there's anything basically, I don't think there's any legitimate reason to be against capitalism except our failure to solve this problem. And to me, it's got to be, I think business has an important role in leading this. And hopefully we're going to see those conversations happen. And there have been, there are people like Ken Mailman, who's now at large private equity firm KKR, and was head of the Republican Party. And you wouldn't think, but he partnered with Andy Stern, who was the head of SEI, organizer of SEIU, union head, about talking about how do we solve this problem, whether it's through guaranteed income or what are the things we have to do. So there are some very serious people that understand this is the challenge facing America. We're not, I don't believe that Zoran won the primary because the people voting for him are socialists. No. I think
there's only 11,000 of them in their organization. It's not. It ain't that.
I don't think it's socialism that won, because many of those same people voted for Trump.
Sure.
And in a sense, Trump and Mamdani's message are the same, even though one of them is clearly a little perverted. I won't say which one. But the fact is that our society is divided by huge inequities in wealth and financial security. And if we don't fix that, capitalism is threatened. If we can deal with that issue, then I think this is the greatest country in the world. Obviously, it's the greatest city in the world. I think we'll be fine.
Okay. A hopeful note on which to end. Thanks so much for coming by. I didn't spend nearly enough time talking about you, but we did talk about
yesterday's news.
Oh, please! You'll be leaving as CEO of the partnership, but we are going to squeeze every last bit of information out of you before then. Thanks so much for coming by.
Thank you, Errol.
Do you want more conversations with the people who are shaping the future of New York City and beyond? Check out our New York One podcast channel in the description. And hit subscribe to let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth political coverage, elections, and issues.